Hey friends, before we get started, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It would help the video out a lot, and it's an easy thing for you to do but means a lot to us. Thanks in advance. When I was really little, I used to visit my grandma in her village during the summer. The village is about 100 kilometers from Ontario, and it's 7 kilometers from the nearest big settlement. There were maybe 10 or 15 houses, and at least half of them were abandoned. It's basically in the woods on a little clearing. The residents were mostly old drunks, and their kids were drunks too. Almost everyone had some kind of animals. My grandma liked to drink, and every evening, when she was having a drink, she'd tell me to close the shutters for the night. If she didn't close them, I would close them every night, get into bed, and sleep peacefully until morning. Then one time, I decided to ask my grandma why I even closed them. She said, "You're too young to understand." But then, one night, just to be rebellious, I left them open. That night, something weird happened. I woke up feeling uneasy, like my stomach was tightening, but there was no fear. Then I realized someone was walking by the windows, peeking in, and quietly tapping their nails on the glass. I really had no idea what was going on. I was about to get up and go over to see what was happening. But then I heard a loud whisper from the side of the bed. "Don't get up." Something was moving along the walls and knocking on the windows. Bella fell off the wall, and when dawn broke, it was all gone. In the morning, I got a smack from my grandma for not closing the shutters. She explained that some kind of spirit, maybe the guardian of the forest where our village is located, had come by. Ever since then, I always make sure to close the shutters. There's another story from around the same area. We went to the countryside to relax as a family. I still remember that night visitor, but I'm not scared anymore because I see myself as an adult and brave now. Not like a year and a half ago. My dad took me fishing early in the morning when the bites were good. We left the house at 4, and it was already getting light outside, with the first rays of sun and birds singing. There were 3 fishing spots, a small lake where hardly anything lived, but I liked it, because there were lots of big frogs and toads in the water. The creek was shallow too, but you could catch all sorts of perch there. We were looking for bigger fish than what you'd find in a small pond. There was this other lake that seemed dark, deep, and pretty big. At least that's how it looked to me back then. So, we decided to head to that big lake, which was about an hour's walk away. To get there, we had to pass through this completely abandoned village, even smaller than the one where my grandma lived. Whenever my dad fought with my mom, he'd take me along, and we'd go there to grill kebabs. He'd drink vodka, and I'd have some soda. This village wasn't even on a main road. The houses were built right between the trees. So we finally arrived with my dad. At the lake on the other side, there were a few houses, but you could only really see one of them clearly. The others were mostly hidden by the trees. My dad and I had never been there, because my grandma said it's a cursed place where no one should be alive. After that, she quietly went on about fishing at that lake, using a lot of swear word and calling my dad all sorts of names for even thinking about fishing there. But my dad was a communist, an atheist, a realist, and he didn't believe in any of that nonsense. So, In the end, I struck a deal with the old lady and learned a couple of things from her. I promised her a few things, and then we headed out. Now we're sitting by the water fishing. My dad's keeping an eye on the bobber while sipping a beer. I'm just gazing at the water and the house visible through the trees. On the other side of the lake, catching butterflies, generally trying to have a good time, because fishing has never really interested me, and it still doesn't. I was running past my dad when suddenly he grabs my arm, sits me down next to him, points towards the house, and says, "Son, I can't see very well. Take a look over there. Someone's walking around." So I turned to look. I've been thinking for a while that my dad is just messing with me. But then I see someone coming out of the house, heading deep into the woods, and then coming back with someone else. They both go back inside. And for some reason, that sight sends chills down my spine, all the way to my toes. The house on the other side has been abandoned for ages. But the one that's still standing has part of the roof caved in, and the windows are all smashed. It's pretty much covered in mold, and there are at least 2 people moving around inside. They don't look like druggies or drunks, because if they were, we'd know all about it. The locals know to avoid those houses. A few kilometers away. My dad went pale too, just sitting there, staring at it. Then he turned to me and said, "Hey, let's pack up quietly and head home." He was quietly rolling up the fishing line while I stuffed everything back in my backpack. Beer, a thermos of tea, and some sandwiches. Then I looked across the lake and saw 3, I don't even know what to call them, just 3 smooth white beings, staring right at us. Smooth. As in, no hair, no nipples, no belly buttons. None of the usual stuff. The bodies were completely still, just staring, which was even creepier. They stood there like mannequins from a store, and if you ignored their eyes, which really stood out against their pale skin, they just watched us for a couple of minutes. Then they started walking around the lake, 2 on one side and 1 on the other, moving at a casual pace. It felt like I was nailed to the spot. My dad grabbed me by the collar and dragged me into the woods, leaving my backpack and fishing rod on the shore. We finally made it home, but my grandma gave my dad a hard time about it. For a long time, he didn't believe her. And then, Dad ended up drinking heavily for a whole week. We went out to get a fishing rod and a backpack, but we never came back. This all happened when I was 10. Usually, I spent my summers in the city, but this time my parents decided to do some major renovations. So they sent me to stay with my grandma in the village for the whole summer. It was the first time I'd stayed there for that long. Before that, I only visited her for holidays. I didn't know anyone in the village. It's not too far from the city, so it's not completely out in the sticks. There are a lot of houses and people have their own farms. There was one store in the village, but since I was a homebody, I didn't really get out much. Everything felt so wild and backwards to me. And the locals didn't seem much different either, since there were no entertainment options or modern conveniences in the village. I had to befriend a group of local guys. There were 4 of them, all around my age. We didn't really have much to talk about, and their idea of fun was pretty simple. I'd either hang out with them, watch my grandma work in the garden, or listen to some ancient Soviet radio. Their activities mostly included swimming in the river, climbing hills and ravines, and the occasional bit of stealing.